Let's go now to our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, Beimnet, welcome to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, exciting time. I don't know if we have the wide shot. People can see the block clock here. We hit 73,635 on Tuesday. My count of the intraday all-time high from March 2024 was 73,835. So we were just about a little bit less than $200 off of the all-time high for Bitcoin this week, a week before the election. I don't know, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin at this point is the $1.4 trillion gorilla in the room you can't ignore, right? It is absolutely massive. It is accelerating higher. It's one of those things that, like, if you're an institutional investor, you're looking at it being like, okay, what are the arguments for why Bitcoin can go higher? There's the whole monetary debasement thing, right, which we can get into. But you look at trades that benefit from that, and you immediately think about gold, which has gone on a spectacular run this year.
Yeah.
On a risk-adjusted basis, one of the best trades you could have done. It's super liquid. It's up, call it 30 to 40% on the year, making fresh all-time highs every other day. So that part of the argument is going great, right? And then you think about it from the regulatory and the adoption side of things. Well, the ETF's incredibly popular.
Incredibly.
Right? The futures product are incredibly popular. The regulatory landscape is probably only going to improve regardless of what candidate is happening. And then you look at kind of the other broader kind of macro risk things. S&P at all-time highs, essentially. Same thing with NASDAQ, a Fed that's easing, et cetera. And so, it's really, really hard for folks to ignore this. This thing is traded almost in every country in the world.
Yeah.
Right? There are local exchanges.
There's a bunch of countries mining it.
I mean,
hoarding
it is unstoppable. It's just a matter of when, not if you break through all-time highs. And then the question is, what type of FOMO do folks get once it breaks? I will tell you, I'm one of those folks that looked at the gold chart, looked at the silver chart, and saw it break, have this clean technical break. And, if you chose not to follow, particularly on the gold example, you missed out on a ton of gains.
Yeah.
Right? And so, when Bitcoin breaks this 74K level, I do think it's going to accelerate, and it's going to force people to pay attention. And it's really, just think about it. There's the ETFs are insanely. Bitcoin's trading like $40 billion a day. It's super liquid. There's a whole ecosystem around it, right? You can buy it on futures and do margin financing.
Buy it in your fintech apps and your retail exchanges. You can buy it at fidelity.com.
Absolutely. And the other thing I think people are really discounting, which has, I think, like gone through a transformational change over the past 6 months or so, is kind of the financing behind crypto, right? Since the ETFs have launched, Bitcoin has traded more like a general collateral asset, basically an asset you can fund at very low costs. And so folks have been able to get like real liquidity from their Bitcoin without actually selling it, right? And so when you get liquidity into a market and you're able to finance it, that reduces, sell pressure, and that actually makes people want to own it more because they're like, I can buy it on margin.
Yeah.
Right? And it becomes almost like a cash equivalent, but you don't actually have to spend the Bitcoin to spend cash. And so there's so many positive things happening for it. And you're looking at it being like, it just got to, $1.4, $1.5 trillion. And, the naysayers will be like, it's got no use case, blah, blah, blah. But all it's done is just defy all the critics constantly. And now there's just so much momentum behind it that, I think like it's really hard for a macro investor or an asset allocator to ignore this, right?
Yeah.
Gold's at 19 trillion, but it's got a bunch of central banks, printing money and buying it. It also has thousands of years of being money. And yet Bitcoin's kind of catching up in a way, although on a relative basis.
And one thing that I think about with gold too is just another sort of like you're just sort of talking through some of the positives and negatives. Just it's held in a centralized manner. gold is not decentralized. Sure,
Yeah,
I've got a little bit of
absolutely.
gold on my finger. There's plenty of like gold out there, but the vast majority of it is like underneath the New York Fed or like in a couple depositories. It's not capable of being taken delivery of at scale, right? So it's not
and
decentralized.
fractions of it as
Yeah.
well. And there've
A couple
been
coins here and there
yeah,
is
and there've
good,
been
but like,
examples of like governments confiscating gold
Oh, yeah.
over time and
Oh, yeah.
forcing you to redeem at levels that aren't fair,
right,
etc.
right.
So yeah, I mean
But like
you
that's
you don't
always,
have to preach to me about the
I know
benefits.
it's one thing that always strikes me though, because like the argument for owning gold is usually quite similar to what the Bitcoiners say about owning Bitcoin. Protection against inflation or debasement or from seizure. I mean, yeah, if you have American Eagle coins in your house, sure, they're probably not going to be able to seize those very easily. Yeah. But the vast majority of people who buy into that trade like gold through a brokerage and don't actually have the gold. Yeah. To me, that's extremely like contradictory and like to own like a government collapse hedge, but not actually store it yourself. Yeah. And the thing is you really can't store it yourself in size gold. It's physically too large and heavy. It's super interesting. I want to ask you too about like corporate adoption, right? There's the headlines about Microsoft. Yeah. Yes, I guess an small activist investor did whatever is required to get a question added for shareholders to some upcoming Microsoft board meeting about whether Microsoft should put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And Microsoft wrote back
recommending that they
they're recommending that shareholders vote against it, the board, but also they wrote back saying like, look, we look at everything including crypto for our balance sheet allocation, but regardless of, I don't want to speculate given that that's a single name stock, but like, do we see this happening more, whether from activists or otherwise? Like, I mean, because like you said, it's really quite difficult to ignore. We're not saying like, hey, you should put on, Doggy Poggy coin. Like this is, the state of Wisconsin Investment Board bought it. We just saw a report that Emory University has bought the Bitcoin ETFs. Like this is not a niche asset.
Yeah.
Do you think you're going to see more corporates like have to either be forced to by their shareholders or decide to?
I mean, it's it's a tough one. Like I don't fully know the nuances behind getting one of the world's largest companies to hold it on their balance sheet. But I do know that BlackRock is a large holder of a ton of
everything. Yeah, of everything
in the U.S.
Yeah.
State Street, Fidelity.
Yeah, there are a lot of big shareholders that own Microsoft that like Bitcoin.
Yeah, besides like Vanguard and Schwab, like most of these companies are at least like pretty friendly to crypto.
But is the case if you're like managing a corporate balance sheet with a bunch of assets on it, like cash and whatever else, like most of them are, right? Because that's where they get the money to buy back their stocks, right? I mean, there's just so much cash in all these big companies' balance sheets. Like, is the case not the same, the case to own Bitcoin as it would be for theoretically an individual or for an endowment? Like, it's the risk return profile.
I mean, it's too volatile. I mean, think about like.
But I mean, don't you just do a small percentage?
You can. I mean, I don't see why you shouldn't.
Right. I mean, like theoretically, the case, the math on Sharp, how it improves the portfolio, it's the same, right?
It's the same. No, I mean, put simply, allocating a small percentage of your portfolio into Bitcoin has proven to enhance your returns from a outright actual absolute return perspective and also from a reducing volatility perspective. And so every portfolio that has added Bitcoin to a small degree has benefited in an improved Sharp on that portfolio versus having not doing so. And that argument with Bitcoin at all-time highs essentially holds truer than ever.
Yeah. It's funny, like when people, there's institutional surveys all the time. I know Fidelity has done this survey many times of what is the reason why, if you're not doing investing in Bitcoin, what's the reason why? And always volatility is the number one answer. And it's funny because I look at that and I think what people really mean is they don't like the downward volatility.
Yeah.
Right? Because the reality is like, I mean, Bitcoin has, it's had many 50% drawdowns and a few like 80+% drawdowns. But it's also just been up forever over a long enough time frame. So it's kind of like, well, they want the volatility to the upside. They just don't want the downside volatility. But like, it's sort of, if you don't like me on my bad days, you don't deserve me on my good days. Because this is an asset that like continuously comes back. You've got like the world's biggest economists always talking smack about it and then just always made to look a fool over and over again. you kind of just have to hold through that. I mean, think about like even Michael Saylor, right? Like, remember when we were talking a couple of years ago about like people were worried, like, oh man, like what's his like liquidation level? Well, I can tell you with certainty, it's nowhere near this price. Like he ended up being super right about the price of Bitcoin. So it just seems like, how many times are our corporate board's gonna say no, and how many times are they gonna be made a fool of 2-3 years in the future? Like at some point,
No,
they've
at
got to
some
learn.
point, yeah. No, absolutely. I just think it happens over time. The younger generations, as they elevate themselves across various companies and stuff. I can't tell you how many different like conferences or happy hours, etc., where it's like, oh, like yeah, we're really into Bitcoin, the younger, more junior staff versus like the senior PM that's like a little bit more conservative.
Makes sense.
And so I think just as adoption happens and as time passes, you'll see folks get more comfortable.
Yeah. Well, I guess we just keep watching. Luckily, I just feel like a broken record. Sometimes it's like
No,
it's like I don't want to apologize for having to constantly tell people that Bitcoin. Even if you look at the Google trend numbers, like it's not back. Like the Google searches, people aren't searching. That comes in after a clean all-time high break. You think we start to get some gappage?
no.
Right?
I mean, I think there's a lot of folks that have been thinking about allocating this year that haven't allocated, and it's all of those people in the middle. And even the folks that are allocated, they're like, I don't own enough.
Yeah.
Right. And you just kind of think about all the positive headwinds. It's like take the example that Trump wins, right? Howard Lutnick, right, who is spearheading the
Transition team. Yeah.
the transition team, was on a podcast the other day saying that he owns hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And that he expects it to be billions.
Yeah.
Right? That's the guy leading the transition team for
Yeah.
the odds-on favorite.
I mean, top other people too. Vivek is huge, loves Bitcoin. RFK Jr. loves Bitcoin. Don Jr., the former president's son, loves
JD
Bitcoin.
Vance
Vance owns Bitcoin. It's
right? It's really hard for me to be like, the regulatory environment's not going to be good.
Yeah.
Right? At the very least. And, you have things like the options that are going to launch on Bitcoin
at some point, yeah, for the ETFs, yeah.
And so
doesn't that like dramatically enhance liquidity, right? It gives like people ways to bet in so many different ways.
It gives folks a way to hedge, and earn yield on their stuff. Yeah, I mean,
it's crazy.
It definitely enhances liquidity.
Last episode before the election, which is next week. Good Lord. I'm happy we're going to, no matter what happens, like, I'm just going to be so happy when election season is over. It's so long in this country. There are countries where they cap, like, campaigning of, like, for only, like, 45 days or something. Like,
yeah.
Because it's just like, dude, I mean, like, it's way too long.
It is
right?
way too long. and way too polarized. I feel like, people just need to sit down and,
I know.
Have a meal with each other. And,
I agree.
And not be so left or right.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of the election and how to trade it, the one thing I know for sure is that the market is constantly surprised by election outcomes, and even more surprised by price action.
Yeah.
Subsequently. And the best example that I've heard, and I may have said it on the last podcast, but if you knew the results in 2016, right, you a day in advance, you probably would have traded it really poorly.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Like.
And so
what, like the Trump outcome trades didn't actually pan out?
Well, the Trump outcome trades were expected to be stocks down.
Right.
Right. And stocks ripped. They went from limit down to, flying higher.
Wow.
And so it's really, I think it's one of those things where you're probably meant to be a fast follow rather than
on whichever it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Wait and see where the trend is.
And once you kind of get an inkling,
yeah,
then you kind of go with the trend. But it should be exciting. I'm hoping for a very clear election outcome.
Yeah,
that is the one thing.
I agree. I would like it to be clear.
Yes.
Let's hope we don't have like 4 or 5 days of uncertainty.
Ambiguity.
Ugh, that'd be awful. Well, we're gonna know soon. That's it for this week, though. Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, thanks.
Appreciate it.